Good night. This right here is the very same couch I first played some of my very favorite childhood games on. I used to play on my 3DS a lot. Over here, there's a plug on the wall right over there, and used to play it charging over here. I played Pokemon Sun and Moon for the first time, and right in this very same couch, I played a bunch of nostalgic childhood games over here. And back in 2017, when I was, I believe, 12 years old, if math serves me right, if my memory serves me right, I played Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney for the first time. But it wasn't on this 3DS. No. I tried it out on an emulator for my old Motorola G3. It was my first smartphone, and really I just wanted to try the game out. Out of all games to play on an emulator on a smartphone, Phoenix Wright is one of the better ones because it is pretty much just a text-based visual novel, text and image-based. It's a story-based thing, it doesn't require much action. So playing with the touchscreen on a very accessible device that was with me at all times actually worked out really great for that game. For those unaware, Ace Attorney is a series where you play as this lawyer called, usually it's Phoenix Wright, later games try out different characters too. And basically, you're tasked with defending people who are accused of murder. Generally speaking, through most of the games, you're never really defending the actual culprit, so it's more like a detective type of thing, where even though it is mostly just a text-based type of experience, you're using your brain to figure out what actually happened in these supposed crimes that apparently happened in the way that you're being told that they were, which is never actually how they actually happened. Usually in the first one, you're working against prosecutor Miles Edgeworth, you know, probably the reason 50% of Fujoshis exist nowadays. And it's a very fun, very engaging experience. You're just kind of gotta use your brain, figure out who these criminals are, how the things actually happen, and it's super satisfying to untangle the mass of mysteries that each of the cases in this game is. And back then, I really did enjoy it a lot. It was a very fun time. I remember even going on a family trip and playing it a little bit over there. I was super engaged with the whole experience, and it was very nice to just have it on my phone at all times. But sadly, I lost that phone. And since my save file was physically stuck on there and I forgot to back it up, I kinda lost my save file for it. So back in the day, as a kid, I never actually managed to finish Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. I got pretty far into it. I got early on into what would be the final case in the original GBA version of the game, but the DS version actually added an extra 5th case that I never got to play up until very recently, and that's only because a few weeks ago I was on YouTube and Shafrillas made this video ranking all the first cases in the Ace Attorney series, and it kind of reminded me, oh yeah, I guess I never finished any Ace Attorney game, which feels weird to say because I mean, it's not like I actually stopped being a fan of Ace Attorney. I enjoy it a lot. I have a lot of fond memories of playing through most of that first game as a kid. It was kind of difficult for me back then, you know, learning English and whatnot, so these cases probably were a lot more challenging than they were supposed to back in the day for me, but I still enjoyed it quite a bit. And you know, being online in the video game / anime sphere, it's kind of impossible to not run into Ace Attorney references here and there, different reviews for all the games. So it almost feels weird to say that I never even beat the first game, and that the first game was pretty much the only one I really played decently far into, at least. So yeah, I decided to finally play it again, so I actually downloaded the mobile version of the trilogy collection that now exists. I don't believe it existed back then. So now there's an actual official way to play this game on your phone, which makes a lot of sense to me. So I decided to finish what I had started all those years ago and replay through all the cases that I had already played. It's been long enough where I had a decently enjoyable experience just getting through them all over again. And then finally got done with that 4th final case and then the 5th one and all the rest of the trilogy, which I still plan on beating as well. But even then, I thought I already knew the broad strokes of, at the very least, that fourth case, just by hearing fans talk about it, and even from the little bit I played of it. And then I actually tried watching the anime Ace Attorney, specifically the arc relating to that fourth case, so I could jump into the next game without having to replay the entirety of the first one, just so I could get to that final part again. I actually ended up not finishing that part of the anime either, just out of, I don't know, I just forgot, I guess. But gosh, I really didn't know what I was missing. Not only does that fourth case have a really good character arc for Maya Fey, who was already my favorite character from the game just due to being a silly little gal, but then I found out she's a silly little gal with self-confidence issues, which is literally my favorite character archetype. She goes into the blurble pile, I don't care. Enjoy your spot there, you're awesome, Maya, I love you. But also just a very interesting case from a game development, gameplay, and story perspective, which I would not really get without actually playing it for myself on my own. But to properly explain that, I think I need to go over the visual novel genre itself and some quirks about it that I feel are pretty interesting and are gonna be relevant to what I'm gonna talk about. Because, are they even really games? I mentioned Phoenix Wright is mostly a visual novel adjacent thing. If you go into the Japanese fan base for this kind of game, they actually have the distinction in what they call adventure games, which are pretty much the same kind of thing, you know, big character portraits on screen, text on the bottom box there, most of it is story focused, you're mostly just reading a lot of the time. The key difference between what defines a visual novel and a quote-unquote adventure game is how interactable it really is. Here in the West, we usually just call every single one of these games visual novels. That includes the more interactable ones like Ace Attorney, which, despite being mostly story-focused, has a degree of interactability because you're doing the investigations yourself, so you gotta do a little bit of pointing and clicking to find the clues. Once you're in the trials, you have to object, you have to present the right evidence at the right time. So it is a little bit more of a game than just a simple watch whatever happens visual novel where you're mostly just reading through a story that happens to be presented in a video game-like software. If you look at something like Danganronpa, that has literally little mini-games in between the visual novel stuff. Here in the West, I feel like most of us just tend to define adventure games as something like an actual, point-and-click adventure game, or even, when I think of adventure, I might go into like action adventure, Zelda stuff. When we say adventure games, I feel like we culturally don't immediately think of visual novel type games. That's a distinction that doesn't really exist around here. It's either a visual novel with stuff you do or a visual novel where you just read. And being a visual novel with stuff you do, aka an adventure game, Ace Attorney is fairly loose when it comes to allowing the player to actually interact with the experience, to actually allowing this to be a sort of little game, and not just kind of a virtual comic you're reading through. It requires a degree of attention to figure out when to present the right evidence in the trials, where to look for stuff in the investigation portions, or at the very least you gotta look up a guide, which, not really that difficult, but then again, you're still having to follow steps. Even looking up a guide and following the proper steps requires a bit of player inputs and mental energy. But even then, it's still hard to apply typical game design concepts and terms to a game like Ace Attorney. Let's say something like ludonarrative dissonance, video essayist's favorite big word. The idea that there's always going to be a separation between the narrative in a video game and the gameplay itself. In an open world game where you're allowed to do anything like GTA or Watch Dogs or what have you, it's weird when you cause a bunch of destruction and alert all the police, but then you go into a mission and everything is fine.
You should have joined that midlife crisis motorcycle club you massacred, you douche.
And maybe even in some of those games, your guy isn't even supposed to be a criminal. If you go into pretty much every single genre of game, there's gonna be a disconnect between the story and the game itself. because the game itself is supposed to allow a degree of not only freedom, but enjoyability in gameplay that usually transcends what the story itself tries to convey.
I look forward to stomping on your corpse.
Even story-focused games like RPGs, you still gotta accept that narrative time doesn't really move in those games until you get to certain points, so you can trigger the story events and the cutscenes. Pretty much by nature of being video games, you're not gonna be able to convey a story 100% cleanly without some sort of compromise to accommodate gameplay. That doesn't happen in Ace Attorney. The gameplay is the story, and the story is the gameplay. If you didn't have the context to surround the player inputs, it would just be a game about clicking menus, and you would be lost on what to do. What's engaging about it is deciphering the story elements and engaging with the characters. That's what makes Ace Attorney fun and engaging, even down to the more tactile stuff like figuring out the cases in the trials and presenting the right evidence and the cool music popping up and you being hyped. That only works because of the context that the narrative is providing you. But even simpler gaming terms, stuff like missions, world maps, and bosses don't really apply to games like Ace Attorney. In Ace Attorney, the story is not only the focus, like maybe some RPGs also have the story be the main focus and motivator for you to play through the game, but it's also the point. If there's no story, there's no gameplay in Ace Attorney. There's no game. So normally, it would be effectively impossible to do a final boss in a visual novel type game like Ace Attorney. Final threats? Maybe. A narrative climax? Sure. A main antagonist? Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But a final boss?
Objection!
And that's where that nightmare-inducing scream comes in. You see, in the final case for the original GBA Ace Attorney, the main prosecutor, Miles Edgeworth, is actually the suspect, and it's your job to actually defend him. It's a big twist in the story, and it's such a cool one, especially because at that point, Edgeworth is shown to be more of a complex character than you really imagine him to be early on. Edgeworth is a really cool character, I enjoy him a lot. So instead of dealing with him and his trickery, you have to contend with something much worse. Manfred von Karma. That guy is a pain in the ass. The dude is an obsessive perfectionist who hasn't lost a case in his like fucking 30+ year career or something. It's actually insane. When you first get into the trial and you try to do anything, press the witness for more information, present something, you're always gonna be hit with this horrifying ass objection scream. Everything you say, everything you attempt to do, you're immediately stopped. You're by this dude who seems to have the entire court in his favor. Even the freaking judge, funny ass judge dude, he doesn't want to deal with Manfred von Karma. That dude has like the entire legal system at a point of his fingers. Through the trials you do with him for that final case, you're having to deal with like ridiculous stuff, like cross-examining a parrot. The funniest moment in all of gaming, I admit, but also absurdly ridiculous, especially when you realize Von Karma trained the parrot to not say the thing that would incriminate the actual murderer. And as a player, and I mean as a player, not as a bystander, not as a watcher or as a reader, as a player, the trials with Von Karma feel different than the trials with Edgeworth. They're more oppressive, they're more tense, they're more challenging, because everything you try and do, there's a curveball, but actually, that stops you in your tracks. Now, Edgeworth was intense too, but it felt more moderate, more fair, even if it did bring out stupid bullcrap like the updated autopsy reports, which I mean, was also unfair and ridiculous. There was a degree of manageability. It felt like you could slowly untangle the mass off the supposed crime scene and get to the actual truth. Whereas with Von Karma, you barely even get a chance to say anything. The trials with Edgeworth feel like a fairly balanced duel of wits, like a rival battle in a more typical video game. We're all gonna try absurd tricks but get somewhere and we're gonna do our very freaking best. Whereas Von Karma feels like dismantling this immovable, unstoppable titan that doesn't even feel an itch when you hit it with your sword. Like an actual video game final boss. By all means, this shouldn't be possible. How do you transmit the mechanical idea of a boss battle into a mostly non-mechanical, story-based, text-based game? It's not even like a text-based RPG where there are concepts like battles and monsters and levels and XP. This is a generally non-violent game. I mean, there's violence in it, you're dealing with murderers, but you don't commit any of the violence yourself. It's not supposed to be a game where you have boss battles and challenges in that sense. Whatever challenge there is in Ace Attorney is easily circumventable by just saves coming.
The testimony contradicts the evidence. No. Fuck.
And I feel like that's kind of the point. You're not here for that challenge. You're here to get through the story with a degree of player control, sure, but not so much so to typically allow for something such as a final boss battle. This is pretty much the first time in the entire game, I would argue, where the story is facilitating the gameplay and not the other way around. While yeah, definitely all the trials require gameplay in the sense that you're always giving the inputs, and definitely the interactability contributes to the feeling of triumph you feel in every single one of these trials when you get to the right answer and finally corner the lying witnesses. This is the first time where an active change in the gameplay affects how the player is feeling. Von Karma would not hit the same if it weren't you clicking the objections, clicking the press button just to see yourself getting stopped again and again by this insufferable old man. If Edgeworth was the mid-boss here, he has maybe a little bit difficult but generally readable patterns that you can work around and learn, whereas Von Karma has all of that as well, sure, but it's like fighting Sans in Undertale. You open that crap and you're gonna be bombarded by a bunch of shit you cannot manage, and it's only through repeated tries, or in Von Karma's case, more like just repeated insistence, that you're actually gonna be able to beat him in the trial. He even has a stupid second phase fake out. You know, like when you're playing, I don't know, like freaking Mario or something, and you like you beat Bowser, and you think you're done, but there's always gonna be like that second phase where he turns giant and he starts running at you in the lava or something. You know, the typical video game stuff. Second phases and final bosses. Von Karma has a second phase! Once you finish the trial for the murder you're supposed to deal with, then suddenly you also have to deal with the DL6 incident that happened like a freaking decade ago at this point. And it's the actual final battle, it's the actual final case. And it comes out of nowhere immediately after you finish that one. It's the super long marathon trial, and it's awesome. Especially when you figure out who's the actual murderer behind that case as well. Who's none other than Von Karma himself. It wraps back around. It's ridiculous. It would never happen in a real life scenario, but it's so satisfying. You're actually taking down the final boss as if it were the dragon you were slaying yourself. But instead of slaying a dragon, you're winning in the court of law. Let's go. Legality, baby! It really is so impressive that they made Von Karma feel different from Edgeworth. And now that I'm going through that extra 5th case for the first Phoenix Wright, and then am planning to get to the other games in the series right after, I am super interested to see how the other prosecutors feel to, I guess, duel or face in trial as well, because I am aware that there's the other Von Karma, and then there's the coffee dude whose name doesn't come to mind, and I wonder if they're also gonna feel any different to face in trial from an actual gameplay perspective. Even if not so, I'm sure they're gonna be fun characters, and I can't wait to see more of this awesome series that I'm really enjoying to fully experience for the first time.